strength. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion, and strength. Gather to celebrate once again. Gather the spirit of heart and mind, seeds for the sowing are lit in store, nurtured in love and conscience refined, with body and spirit united once more. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion, and strength. Gather to celebrate once again. Gather the spirit growing in awe, drawn by the moon and fed by the sun. Winter to spring and summer to fall, the chorus of life resounding as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion, and strength. Gather to celebrate once again.
Have you ever been in a bad relationship? One that really messes with your sense of self? Maybe with a boss or a partner or a sibling? The kind of bad where too much of your time is spent arguing with their worldview, either out loud or in your head. The kind of relationship where you have to keep looking for and enforcing boundaries. The kind of relationship where your self-esteem is under assault all the time. And what did you do about it? Did you figure out better boundaries? Did you leave? Are you still smack dab in the middle of it? What if you were forced to stay in this abusive relationship as is for your entire life? What would that do to you? What parts of your life would suffer because you were spending so much of your time resisting the destructive messages of this relationship? And what parts of yourself would never have space to bloom? America is a nation built on genocide and slavery. And while this is appalling, people behaving atrociously towards one another is not unique to this country. In the competition for resources and power, humans have, at times, treated one another horribly in all places, in all times. Of course, they have been altruistic and cooperative as well, but that's another sermon. In order to justify the ugly things we do, we have to dehumanize other people. There is always us and them is never quite fully human. This need to dehumanize others in order to exploit them or rob them or kill them or simply deny them human rights is a powerful force, and we engage in it every day. We make people less than all the time. Do Black Lives Matter? Or is that idea so threatening that we have to rationalize and justify police brutality and paint BLM protesters as domestic terrorists? Can gay people get married and adopt children? Can we refuse to bake them cakes? Are trans people allowed to go to the bathroom safely in a way that affirms their identity? Do we endorse equal pay for equal work for women? Every day we fight about whether this group of people or that are fully human, and the dominant group in power thinks that it is their decision to make. How often have we heard people express that equal rights are important? Of course they are, but now is not a good time, or that it needs to happen in incremental stages. The dominant absolutely believe that equality is theirs to grant or withhold. These are bad relationships on a grand scale, and every day marginalized people are having to argue out loud or in their heads with a toxic worldview. Every day they have to shore up boundaries and try to protect self-esteem. How exhausting. Anthony Pinn is an author, academic, and a Black humanist. Pinn concerns himself in his studies and his writing with the religious life of people who are Black. A particular idea of Pinn's that I want to hold up this morning is complex subjectivity. Pinn writes about complex subjectivity in his book, Terror and Triumph, The Nature of Black Religion. Pinn is a humanist who does not believe that the arc of the universe is long and bends toward justice. He sees no evidence of that. Instead, he maintains that it is the struggle that matters. Especially in Black churches, both Christian Black churches and the Nation of Islam, the focus of religion is with the struggle. Pinn's premise is that through enslavement and later Jim Crow, both the old and the new, Black people were dehumanized. White violence such as lynching, torture, and incarceration, further dehumanize people. A host of social, psychological, and legal ramifications and restrictions supported and enforce this dehumanization. And of course, this dehumanization is not behind us, but still practiced. It is not a past tense problem. Pinn's book details the terror through which the Black body is made into mementos or objects through which white supremacy is played out. The response of Black religion is to combat the processes of dehumanization and objectification. It is an historical religion that helps to make sense of suffering. A reviewer of the book wrote, in essence, for more than 250 years, the Black church has been addressing terror, dehumanization, and objectification through what Pinn calls liberative activism. It is in this struggle against dehumanization that Pinn locates the core of Black religion, the quest for complex subjectivity, or a desire or feeling for more life meaning. So complex subjectivity is a desire for more life meaning. Let me elaborate on this as I understand it. First, there is the context that people live in, a long history of enslavement and dehumanization, an endless, terrible relationship. Then there is the struggle to define yourself as human, to reject the imposed notion that you are somehow less than human. You try to find your boundaries. You guard your self-esteem, which is constantly under attack. And finally, there is an embrace of complex subjectivity, an embrace of the fullness of life rather than the reduction of life, an embrace of your full, complicated, and beautiful humanity. Complex subjectivity is a struggle for increased agency and a richer, more meaningful life. Simplistically, we might think about it like this. The subject is more complex. Not a flattened version of a not quite human being that serves a purpose for other human beings, but a person with complex thoughts and experiences and the right to define themselves, the right to be a fully realized, complex, complicated person, the right to a life of meaning. So Pinn's focus is on his own community, but it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see where many of his notions also apply to other marginalized peoples. The Black church and the Nation of Islam might be unique to Black people, but I imagine queer people, women, indigenous people, people with disabilities, immigrants from Mexico and Middle America, and anybody else who has been told they are less than human in this country also struggle for complex subjectivity and are shaped by pushing back on the notion that they are not as valuable. So let me give you one example. Based on my watching habits, YouTube knows I really like a good poignant cry, and it sends me videos to produce that result. There is one type of video in this genre, however, that really offends me. The story is that Mickey Mouse or Santa or the barista has learned 5 signs and communicates with a deaf person. The hearing person is held up as a benevolent hero, and the deaf person is always a one-dimensional character overwhelmed by gratitude. How obnoxious. In reality, many deaf people consider themselves to be a linguistic minority in America. They have a unique and robust culture, and American Sign Language is at the center of that culture. There is a long history of oppression by the hearing world and a fierce resistance. One often hears the idea that people who cannot communicate because they do not know sign language are in fact the disabled. The whole setup of hero and pathetic recipient flattens the complex subjectivity of people who are deaf. They are reduced to props in somebody else's story. They are not quite human. So let me shift gears from talking about complex subjectivity for a couple of minutes. We have talked before about Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Kendi gives us some solid definitions to work from. He defines things like this. A racist is one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. And an anti-racist, one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. Kendi points out that many of us who despise the Trumps of the world, unfortunately, share their self-definition of not racist. We often hear people say, and might have said ourselves, I'm not a racist. So why is that a problematic thing to say? Kendi asserts that it is a claim that signifies neutrality. I'm not a racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. But he says there is no neutrality in the racism struggle. The opposite of racist isn't not racist, it's anti-racist. What's the difference? Kendi explains one endorses either the idea of a racial hierarchy as a racist or of racial equality as an anti-racist. One either believes in the problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist, or locates the roots of a problem in power and policies as an anti-racist. One either allows racial inequalities to persevere as a racist, or confronts racial inequalities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between space of not racist. You either endorse racist policies actively or passively, or you endorse anti-racist policies by doing something to end them. Now I want to pull these two streams of thought, complex subjectivity and anti-racism, together. Because isn't that what racism or any other ism is at its heart? An effort to dehumanize and deny people their complex subjectivity or full humanity for your own ends. I would guess that many of us would say we are not racist. We are, after all, good, open-minded, and liberal people. And we believe that the problems of racism and other isms in our society rest out there, not in here, not in my heart. But we might have to add more. I'm not a racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. I would include myself in this number often. I have not been aggressively against racism for most of my life in anything but the abstract. I can point to times in this past week where I was not adequately anti-racist. I fall down all the time. I have been not racist, but not anti-racist. This idea that we can be good people, people who intentionally work to be inclusive, loving people, and still be racist is hard to get our heads around. But if we merely think that racism is bad and doing nothing is bad, and then we do nothing to disrupt it, we authorize it. I think a lot of us are still operating from a notion of racism from another era. Racism was white hoods and saying terrible things. I don't do that. I don't believe in an Aryan race purity ideology. And so I am deeply offended if you point out that I am being racist. But we have moved on. Now we understand that we are all raised with implicit bias. All of us are. Marginalized people are given the same societal messages as people in the dominant culture. These biases are deep and largely unconscious for those in the dominant culture. You were raised with a worldview. It takes an extraordinary effort to see the water that you swim in. Now we understand that there is a system of racism that is designed to benefit some at the expense of others. Racism means you benefit from that system and do nothing to dismantle it. Being not racist lets the system continue. It isn't enough. We have to be anti-racist. And I think this is where Unitarian Universalism often falls short. Since the denomination is comprised primarily of people from the dominant culture who benefit from racist systems, it's hard for us not only to see it, but to be consistently anti-racist. Those of us with white privilege have the luxury of being in the struggle or dropping out when we grow weary of it, or distracted by other things, or become uncomfortable, or we are just over it. But if it is your humanity that is in doubt, you never get a day off. This creates a trust deficit. Well, here you are today, being an ally, showing up, saying and doing the right things. But will you be here tomorrow? And experience tells us that no, you won't be. I am one of those people that grew up in mostly white spaces. I was so naive, I didn't even know a lot of the stereotypes about people of color until I started to engage with anti-racism. I could believe that I wasn't racist without ever being confronted with my own bias. And because of that, I could go about my daily life thinking that since I did not live where people were fighting to assert their own complex subjectivity, I didn't have to engage. It was a problem best left to places where people of color lived. And then I had a secondhand moment of epiphany. I was working in an Oregon congregation, and they shared an experience they had had with me. A speaker had educated them about early laws in Oregon that essentially made it illegal for people of color to live there. It came to me then that an absence of people of color does not let you off the hook. It isn't an accident who lives where. It is still part of the system, and I am still part of the system. A few weeks ago, Karen Wills from the Unitarian Universalist Justice Group, Moose Jaw, spoke to us. She pointed out that UUs like to wrestle with ideas in the abstract, but that at some point, all of our good thinking needs to move to hearts and hands. So I want to end now with some small ways folks in the dominant culture can stop denying people their own complex subjectivity. And I want to acknowledge that this entire sermon has been for people in the dominant culture. If you are an Indigenous person or a person of color, there wasn't much here to feed your complex subjectivity, to minister to you and to deepen your spirituality. And that is the distance to bridge in being an anti-racist, a distance especially relevant to me, and I still have work to do. For those in the dominant culture, and at least part of your identity, I would suggest you keep reading, keep watching movies and YouTube channels, keep listening to podcasts and radio programs. In whatever way you learn, keep learning. Give yourself a challenge this year to learn a little bit more than you are comfortable learning. Next, work on building your anti-racist muscles. When you grow weary of the topic or decide it has nothing to do with your life or that you are too busy with other concerns, pull yourself back and hang in there. I can tell you from personal experience, it becomes more possible to stick with anti-racism work by encouraging yourself to be uncomfortable a little bit longer, over and over. And finally, an easy way to notice yourself denying people their complex subjectivity is to catch yourself every time you flatten someone. Sentences that begin the gays or the blacks or the Lakota are not going to end in complex subjectivity. Catch yourself when you start your ideas with, if they would just, trans people want, Indigenous people just need to. Notice when you're generalizing inappropriately about an entire group of complex, fully human, diverse human beings. And conversely, catch yourself when you deny complex subjectivity by implying that one person or a handful of people represent an entire group, another main tenet of racism. I have worked with them, so I know what I'm talking about. I have a friend who is X, so I understand the X experience. My sister-in-law is a member of Y, and she says why people believe this. I have a friend who is trans, and he says I didn't do anything wrong, so I know I have the trans stamp of approval for my views. I have met some Indigenous people, so now I can speak for them. People are complex. Honor that complexity. We often say that if you have been to one Unitarian Universalist congregation, you have been to one Unitarian Universalist congregation. And when asked what Unitarian Universalist believes, we often reply, which one? We grant ourselves full complex subjectivity. We vigorously reject the notion that anybody else speaks for us. Why do we imagine anybody else is less complex or less unique? There's a wonderful vlog called Lust for Life that creates words for ideas without words. One of my favorites is Sonder. Sonder, noun. The realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own. Perhaps it will help us to think about complex subjectivity and being anti-racist as an intention to do everything in our power every day to affirm and promote each person's full humanity and quest for deeper meaning, especially in our own thoughts and actions. I imagine that there have been powerful gifts from the struggle for marginalized people to claim their humanity, and Pinn might argue that the struggle will never end. But I also imagine there are gifts lost when people have to spend so much time on the struggle. I have to believe that humanity will benefit from the possibilities of all people being accepted and celebrated for their unique gifts, their full humanity a given. May it be so, and may we help make it so by starting with the person in the mirror. So please join Alicia in singing hymn number 169, We Shall Overcome, with the hope that the arc may yet bend towards justice. We will extinguish our chalices with Joseph M. Cherry's Prayer for Living Intention, and then have one more beautiful piece of music by Alicia as we sit with all we have heard and felt today, and then we'll begin our coffee hour. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, and loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving.
What is this thing called justice? Child asked the elder. When will I ever find it? When? Said the elder, this is a question wise. Searched in the dark by 1,000 eyes, challenging all of the alibis of heart and mind. Some have seen through the ages long. When we live with our conscience strong, we edge closer to right than wrong, and we find we are bending towards justice, and we're hungry now to come. We are bending towards justice. Yes, and mercy for the daughters and sons. What is this thing called justice? The child asked the elder. When will I ever see it? When? It's the hungry fed and the naked clothed, sharing the comforts and all the woes. Chance for each to learn and grow, flourish like a seed, speaking the truth to mercy's end, turning an enemy to a friend, never allowing your light to bend toward the gravity of greed. We are bending towards justice, and we're hungry now till it comes. We are bending towards justice. Yes, and mercy for the daughters and sons. What can I do for justice? Child asked the elder. How can I bend us closer? Tell me now. Do your best to love as the sages say. Learn how you can, try to find a way. Seek till you think your heart will break. That's not all. As the rivers dry and the oceans warm, lives are lost in the angry storms. Far greater justice must be born to save